Located a mile from the spot where the states of Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Maryland all meet, is the historic town of Newark, Delaware. Academy Hill is one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods.
Academy Hills is a very nice neighborhood, very, very low crime rate, very well kept. Everyone really cared about their manicured lawns, and a very, very nice area.
It's this quiet, peaceful lifestyle that 46-year-old nurse Debbie Puglisi and her husband Nino have come to know and love.
Nino and I moved into Academy Hill in the summer of 1997. At the time, our twins were 19 years old, and they were off to college. Nino had looked at this development years before we actually moved. It was a home that we dreamed of. We never thought we would be able to live in this community.
What Debbie Puglisi could not have imagined is that her world would soon be turned upside down.
You scared me to death. What are you doing home so early?
Slow day.
Nino was a wonderful man. We were approaching our 25th wedding anniversary, and so we were making plans just to be together. Nino and I were very happy.
Thought I'd come home and fix myself up an afternoon snack. You want to join me?
I'd love to. But they called me into work this afternoon, and I want to get these roses in.
Suit yourself.
Thanks, honey. These flowers won't plant themselves.
When Nino and I moved into Academy Hill, we were welcomed by a lovely couple, Jean and Karen Nygaard.
Hey, Jean.
They lived right next door to us, and we became friends. I had finished planting the rose bushes, and it felt like it was getting later, so I decided I would go in. I was stunned. I'm like, oh my goodness, what just happened? My glasses had been knocked off, and I was very nearsighted. So I really, really didn't know what was going on, and I was still in that shock, wondering, where's Nino? What's going on?
Stay down, bitch.
When I glanced up, I saw a shadow of a man. Oh my gosh, there's an intruder.
Where's your money?
It's in my purse. By the sink. My wallet's in there. Take everything.
So he went over, and I stayed on the kitchen floor, and I heard him rumbling through the drawers, but again, I really didn't look up. I could not see very far because of the nearsightedness. I'm wondering where my husband is. The whole time I'm thinking, Nino, please, where are you? And Nino, stay away.
Get up.
Next thing I know, we're going down the hallway, and he opened a door to the basement and dragged me down the basement steps. I remember being in so much pain, being dragged down the steps. My hands were just trembling.
Get down. Shut up.
And then he pushed me down onto the cement floor.
Let's do this.
No.
Lay down.
Just 15, 20 minutes before this, I'm in the garden, I'm planting rose bushes, and now I'm being raped. There's a person who's, in our home. It was just a nightmare. He raped me, pulled the sweatpants up.
Come here.
He began tying me.
Give me your hands.
He had taken drapery cords from my own drapes, and he had brought rope with him. So he ties me up. I thought he came to rape me, rob me, and he was done.
Stay here. Stay.
I heard him walk away. I was really trying to untie the ropes so I could get to the phone, but they were tied enough for me not to be able to get to the phone. I'm hoping that Nina will be coming to my rescue, not even thinking that this person would return.
Nina, is it you? Is it you?
Nah. It ain't Nino. Shut up.
He gathers me up, and there was no way that I could defend myself. I still had ties on my wrists and on my ankles, and he was much larger than I am. I could see the shadow of a car backed up in front of our home. I didn't know what to think. I am panicked. I'm praying it's in the middle of the afternoon. Why doesn't someone see this? No one's coming to my rescue. Where's Nino? I am just beside myself.
I said shut up or I'll kill you.
He's very angry. He slams the trunk down and continues on. I really couldn't see. I'm tied and bound. And I just had to listen. And I could feel the car moving along. I was so panicked, I really had trouble even processing the fact that I'm being kidnapped.
Meanwhile, at work, Debbie's absence is starting to be noticed.
Hey, Nancy. Any word from Debbie? She's supposed to work tonight.
Debbie was an employee that would always report exactly to her shift on time, always dependable.
Come on.
Hi, you reached Debbie and Nina. We can't come to the phone right now. Leave a message.
We hadn't heard from Debbie, kept trying to call her and call her. It just was so out of character for Debbie not to call in for work. And that's when we decided I'd ride over there.
At approximately 6:30 p.m., 2 hours after Debbie was supposed to be at work, Shirley heads to Debbie Puglisi's home.
Everything looked fine. Lawns were well done. Nothing seemed out of ordinary. And a neighbor was outside next door, and I introduced myself.
Excuse me. Hi, I'm Shirley. I work with Debbie. Have you seen her?
Yeah, she was planting roses for most of the afternoon. Everything okay?
I'm sure it's fine.
Well, the side door's always open if she doesn't answer.
Thank you.
And I walked in. The house was quiet.
Debbie?
In the kitchen, her things were on the counter. I thought, that's odd.
Debbie?
And I'm calling for her and Nino.
Nino?
And the house is just very still.
Is everything okay?
When I walked into the edge of the bedroom, I saw Nino.
When Debbie Puglisi doesn't show up for work, her concerned colleague pays a visit to her house. But she doesn't find Debbie. Instead, she finds Debbie's husband, Nino.
When I saw Nino on the floor, by the look of his hands, I knew right away he was dead.
Police and paramedics are immediately called to the scene.
Mr. Puglisi was confirmed DOA by the local paramedics. He had a gunshot wound to the head. Debbie didn't make it to work that day, so you have to start thinking, is this a domestic that went bad? Where is Mrs. Puglisi?
At that point, police have no clue that 46-year-old Debbie Puglisi has been kidnapped. And Debbie has no idea where her husband is or where her abductor is taking her. After driving across town, Debbie's abductor carries her from the trunk of his car to inside his home.
Jen.
Oh, please, please.
Stay down.
Please, please let me go. Whatever you can have. Just let me go. Just let me go. Please. I'm letting you go. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Why are you doing this?
My assailant then tied me much tighter this time.
I won't say anything.
Shut up!
Not only did I know that I was now trapped, I knew that he was going to punish me, which he did.
You're not going anywhere, bitch.
Outside the house where she's being held, it is a tranquil spring evening. No one could imagine the horrors transpiring just beyond the front door.
He had taken me into the bathroom, put me on the floor, covered me with something, and he left. He just walked out of the room. I heard the door shut. He was gone. And of course, I'm thinking of my husband, my children. I was in agony, both physically, emotionally. I just laid there and thought to myself, Debbie, you're not going to get out of here. When I heard the two gunshots, my hope was that the police are here, I'm going to get out of here. And that did not happen. Moments later, I realized that he was just firing the gun.
Shut up, bitch! Shut up!
He starts dragging me again, and he took me into a different room on the floor, and I hear a television being turned on.
Our top story, Nino Puglisi, a family man who worked at a funeral home and was just 50 years of age, was found shot to death in his home, and his wife Deborah is missing. His wife, Deborah Puglisi, has become a person of interest.
I had not even imagined that my husband could be dead. My thoughts are wavering from my husband being dead, my children now finding out not only is their mother missing, but their father is dead. And I was just... just the thought that someone could, believe that I would hurt my husband was it was a victimization.
Get up. If you make a sound, I'll kill you too. I promise.
That's when he raped me again. It was one of the most horrifying experiences in my life. I couldn't think. I'm like, what is happening? It's all happening so fast.
For a full day, detectives interview family and friends. But 24 hours after Debbie's disappearance, they are no closer to figuring out who killed Nino or where she could be.
There's no gun left behind, so nothing to process there. There was no forced entry, nothing to process there. In this type of situation, you have to really go outside the box. We have to start looking at, is this a domestic situation that went bad? You have to ask the hard questions. When's the last time you heard them argue, and what was that about? Nothing. How were your mother and father? What was their relationship? No issues there at all. These facts just are not adding up.
All right, well, thank you so much for your help. I appreciate it. Okay, bye-bye. Both of them say the same thing. Their parents were kind, loving people, never fought, always happy. Mom wouldn't do something like this.
I was questioned till 2 or 3 in the morning. It was all about Debbie and their relationship. I just was very clear this would not be Debbie. Hers and Nino's relationship, this was not something she would ever do. I think there was concern, Nino's dead, Debbie's missing, what's going on?
You must be Darlene? Thank you so much for coming in. I'm so sorry for what you're going through.
There was a phone call in the middle of the night, and I heard basically in one sentence, your brother-in-law has been murdered and your sister is missing. That's how I learned. Of course, I was the subject of interrogation. I had spent 2 weeks with Debbie the month before.
I thought maybe you could take a look around and see if anything might be missing.
Sure. The police wanted to know if there were any signs of something out of the ordinary in the house, and there definitely were. I was able to see that her wedding band was on the kitchen sink, her glasses were on the floor, things were definitely disturbed.
Those are Debbie's. She would never leave the house without her glasses.
But no one could guess that Debbie Puglisi is just 5 miles away in a fight for her life.
Dawn? Just checking to see if you're coming into work today. Give me a call.
A voice of a woman came on, a friend, coworker. She said, Don, where are you? And so then I found out his name was Don. I didn't know at the time where he worked, but I knew that he had missed work on Monday night.
Hey, Don. Oh, hey. Hey, I apologize.
He's out in the yard, and he was talking to the neighbors. I just laid there again, Frank, just hoping that this man does not come in and kill me.
Two days have passed since Debbie Puglisi's husband was killed and she was kidnapped. Yet police continue to struggle to turn up any leads.
Sorry to bother you again. I just have a few more questions for you.
Initially, we had neighbors tell us they heard nothing, but then we talked to them a little bit more, which is rather common. You go back and re-interview people. They said, well, I didn't hear anything, but I did see the car back up to the front door, and I saw this guy put a rug in the trunk of the car. So then we're like, here we go. Now we're thinking this could be something very different.
Does this look like a tire tread to you?
We found a set of tire tracks that went up over the lawn and to the front door. We're thinking that is extremely different, especially for this neighborhood.
Okay, let's rope this off, take a look at it, see if we can find anything new.
Now we have a legit kidnapping, and that kind of changes the whole course of the investigation. Why was she kidnapped? Why wasn't she also a victim at the house? But when you're dealing now with a stranger type homicide / kidnap, every minute that goes by is not good.
Meanwhile, Debbie's sister Darlene tries her best to comfort Debbie's children.
Everybody deals with this kind of trauma differently. We have a lot of law enforcement in the family, my brother, my husband. So it was a matter of hours, days, and the odds. And the odds were not looking good. From day to day, I knew, and my brothers knew, that the odds of finding her alive were diminishing. And at the same time, we're dealing with two twins grieving their father.
We can't give up hope. Your mom could still be alive.
It just doesn't feel real. I mean, who would do something like this?
It was just increasingly like a pressure cooker. The uncertainty is what was really hard, hanging over them.
Only a few miles away, Debbie herself is close to giving up hope.
The way that he would bind me is he would put what's called a hog tie. I would have my hands behind my back, and he would put the rope from my wrist to my ankles, so I'd pretty much be in the fetal position. I was always fearful, knowing how powerful this man was. Even though I knew that he was out of the home, I never knew for how long.
"52 hours after the abduction, Debbie's kidnapper begins showing a different side of himself.
I wanted you to know, and I'm very sorry that I had to kill your husband. That was never a part of my plan. As a matter of fact, I'd let you go, but you've seen my face. You've seen this place. It's too dangerous.
When he said that, at that point, I believe I went into survival mode. I really wanted to prove to him that I could be trusted and just let him think that I was going to be a good girl. I knew that it was something I had to do to get back to my children.
I'm not trying to argue, but I can't see without my glasses. I promise. I couldn't identify you if I tried.
I'm not stupid.
No, of course not.
Do you want something to eat? I can make some eggs.
Okay? That would be very nice.
You want to take a shower?
I don't think I could stand up, sir.
A bath. How about a bath?
Yes, please. That would be wonderful.
I've always been a very modest person, and Nina was too. And it was difficult to have to disrobe and wash myself in front of a complete stranger. But that was the least of my worries. I couldn't complain. I tried to just comply.
Sir? Do you think you might have any peroxide?
Here.
I would look down at my hands and the swelling, the bleeding, the infection. You know, I reflected back, you know, it wasn't but a few days ago, and I was, you know, at our dream house planting rose bushes. Just in a minute, your life can change.
Are you gonna wash your hair?
I don't think I can do anything with them. They hurt too much.
I'll do it for you.
He felt the need for me to wash my hair and then proceeded to wash my hair. It felt like another rape. It was just so, this is an intimate act that maybe, you know, your partner, your husband would do for you. And to me, I even get goosebumps when I think of him massaging my head. When he was done, I got out.
Put those on.
And I had to put his sweatpants on. I had a t-shirt of his that I had to wear. It was horrible. It was horrible.
I should make you more comfortable.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So he ties me up, he puts on a news channel, and I realized that my case was the big story. That's when things really, really got strange.
Breaking news on the murder of Anthony Nino Puglisi and the disappearance of his wife Deborah Puglisi. Police now say that Deborah is not a suspect, but perhaps a victim of the person who killed her husband 3 days ago. But police still have no leads.
They were saying that they had no clues as to my whereabouts, and it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Of course, I was very discouraged, again, feeling hopeless and powerless.
A funeral for Anthony Puglisi will be held next Monday at the same funeral home where he worked as a funeral director.
Debbie would have wanted this too. The family asked for respect during this time.
The family spoke of me in the past tense, so they pretty much had given up a lot of hope.
Looks like I've committed the perfect crime.
Nino's viewing was going to be Sunday night, and I so wanted to be with them. Right away, I'm thinking, I've got to be there. I've got to do something now. This is time to act. I've got to do something.
Three days after Debbie Puglisi is kidnapped and her husband murdered, police still have no leads. They shift some of their investigation from the search for Debbie Puglisi to the search for her body.
We didn't give up, but you're kind of just waiting after day 2, 3 going on that, hey, a body's been recovered. You hope and you pray that that's not the fact, but that's how usually the cases with a stranger kidnapped go.
Sure enough, as investigators scour the city, they come across human remains not far from Debbie Puglisi's home.
Yeah, it's not her. The body wouldn't be that decomposed after only 3 days.
In that area, you're on the main corridor, Route 40. We had a serial murderer working that same corridor, so it wasn't that much of a surprise.
Back to square one.
But in a small...
There are fires that destroy homes. There are fires that erase families. And then there are fires that leave behind a question so impossible, so haunting, that more than 70 years later, investigators, journalists, and ordinary people are still asking the same thing. How can 5 children vanish into thin air without leaving a single trace? Christmas Eve, Fayetteville, West Virginia, December 24th, 1945. The war had finally ended. Across America, families were trying to reclaim something that had been missing for years. Normal life. Streets were decorated with lights. Church bells echoed through the cold Appalachian hills. Children waited for dawn, dreaming of presents hidden beneath glowing Christmas trees. It should have been a night remembered for laughter. Instead, It became one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. The Sodder family appeared to have everything that mattered. George Sodder had built a successful trucking business after immigrating from Italy decades earlier. He had arrived in America with almost nothing, unable to speak English, carrying only determination and ambition. Through relentless work, he transformed himself into a respected businessman. His wife, Jenny, shared that relentless spirit. Together they raised 10 children in a large white frame house overlooking the quiet town of Fayetteville. Neighbors knew them well. The Sodder children filled the yard with noise almost every afternoon. The older siblings helped around the house, while the younger ones chased each other across the hillside. They were not wealthy by the standards of America's elite, but they were comfortable, respected, and deeply rooted in the community. Yet beneath the appearance of ordinary family life, tensions quietly simmered. George Sodder never hid his opinions. He openly criticized Benito Mussolini and the fascist government that still had supporters among some Italian immigrants. Political arguments followed him everywhere, from local businesses to gatherings with fellow immigrants. He spoke loudly, refused to back down, and often left conversations with enemies rather than friends. Most people dismissed those arguments as harmless. Heated words rarely turned into real violence. At least, that was what everyone believed. Christmas Eve unfolded almost exactly as anyone would expect. The younger children were especially excited that year. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty, and Sylvia spent the evening opening gifts and playing with new toys. Their older sister Marion stayed awake longer, helping their mother tidy the house, while George relaxed after another long day of work. Around 10 o'clock, Jenny reminded the children it was getting late. Some obeyed immediately. 5 of them begged for just a little more time. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty. They wanted to stay downstairs, play with their new presents, and enjoy the last magical hours before Christmas morning officially arrived. Their mother finally agreed. It was Christmas. Rules could wait one more night. Jenny went upstairs with a younger daughter, Sylvia. George followed shortly afterward. The older sons, John and George Jr., had already gone to bed after finishing chores earlier that evening. The house slowly settled into silence. Outside, winter winds moved gently through the hills. Nothing seemed unusual. Then, at approximately 12:30 a.m., Jenny was suddenly awakened. Not by smoke. Not by flames. By a telephone ringing downstairs. She answered. A woman she did not recognize laughed strangely into the receiver. Loud voices echoed in the background. Glasses clinked as if a party were taking place somewhere far away. The caller asked for someone whose name Jenny did not recognize. "You have the wrong number," she replied. The woman continued laughing. Then the line went dead. It was odd, but wrong numbers happened. Jenny hung up and started back toward the bedroom. As she walked through the house, something caught her attention. The lights downstairs were still on. The curtains remained open. The front door was unlocked. She assumed the children had forgotten to turn everything off before going to sleep. Muttering to herself, she locked the door, switched off the lights, and returned upstairs. She never checked whether all 5 children had actually gone to bed. That small decision would become one of the most agonizing details in the entire investigation. Minutes passed. Then came another sound. A loud thud. Almost like something striking the roof. It was heavy enough to wake Jenny again. She listened. Silence followed. Eventually, she drifted back to sleep. 45 minutes later, she awoke for the 3rd time. This time it was different. The air itself had changed. Smoke filled the hallway. Heat rolled across the ceiling. Orange light flickered through the doorway. The house was burning. Everything happened with terrifying speed. Jenny screamed for George. He jumped from bed, opening the bedroom door to find flames already racing through the staircase. The fire had begun downstairs. Within moments, it was climbing toward the second floor. George shouted for everyone to get out. Chaos erupted. Children cried. Doors slammed. Smoke swallowed every hallway. Marion grabbed little Sylvia. John and George Jr. stumbled through choking black clouds toward the exit. George and Jenny desperately counted faces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only 5 children stood outside. 5 others were missing. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty. According to everyone outside the burning house, those children were believed to be sleeping upstairs. George immediately tried to rush back inside. The flames drove him back. He tried another entrance. Again, the heat forced him away. His skin blistered instantly. His face burned. Still, he refused to stop. Then he remembered something. His work truck. George owned heavy trucks parked beside the house. He believed he could use one to climb onto the roof or reach the upstairs windows. He sprinted toward them. The first truck would not start. That was strange. It had worked perfectly the previous day. He ran to the second. Nothing. Its engine also failed. Both vehicles, reliable for years, suddenly refused to run on the very night they were needed most. George later insisted someone had tampered with them. Investigators would never prove it, but they never fully explained it either. Time was running out. George searched desperately for another way. Usually a ladder rested against the side of the house. It was gone. He searched frantically around the property. Nothing. The ladder had disappeared. With every passing second, the fire grew stronger. Windows exploded outward. Wood cracked. The roof groaned under unbearable heat. George screamed the children's names. No answers came back. Neighbors began arriving after seeing the glow against the night sky. Someone attempted to telephone the fire department. The operator could not be reached. Another neighbor drove into town personally to alert firefighters because telephone communication had somehow failed. Meanwhile, the Sodder home continued collapsing into itself. The family stood helplessly in the freezing darkness. Parents watched everything they had built disappear before their eyes. But they were not watching possessions burn. They believed they were watching 5 of their children die. Hours later, when the fire was finally extinguished, little remained except smoking debris. Firefighters searched the ruins. Officials concluded the missing children had perished inside. The explanation sounded simple. Too simple. According to the official report, the intense heat had completely consumed their bodies. The case appeared closed before sunrise. But George Sodder refused to accept what he was hearing. He had worked around machinery and fire for decades. He knew how buildings burned. He also knew something else. Human bones do not simply disappear. Even in devastating fires, skeletal remains are usually recoverable. Teeth often survive temperatures that destroy nearly everything else. Fragments of bone frequently remain even after prolonged exposure to extreme heat. Yet investigators reported finding virtually nothing belonging to the 5 missing children. No skulls. No recognizable bones. No teeth. Nothing. George stared at the ashes where his home had once stood. He was not grieving in the same way everyone expected. He was questioning every minute of that night. The strange telephone call, the loud object striking the roof, the missing ladder, the 2 disabled trucks, the astonishing absence of remains. Each detail might have seemed insignificant on its own. Together they formed something impossible to ignore. Then another disturbing fact surfaced. The local fire chief later admitted he had not immediately responded because there was no organized overnight fire watch. The alarm system depended on a telephone chain that delayed the response for precious hours. By the time firefighters arrived, there was almost nothing left to save. Still, the investigation remained brief. Authorities classified the tragedy as an accidental house fire caused by faulty electrical wiring. Case closed. Except one problem emerged almost immediately. George had recently had the home's electrical system inspected. The wiring had reportedly been declared safe. Even more confusing, several witnesses later claimed they had seen lights inside the house during the early stages of the fire, suggesting electricity may still have been functioning. If faulty wiring had started a blaze, why had the lights apparently remained on? Questions multiplied. Answers did not. Days after the fire, George returned to the ruins once more. He sifted through ashes with his own hands. He refused to believe that 5 children could simply vanish. Then came another discovery that made the official explanation even harder to accept. Buried among the debris, George found household objects that had survived remarkably well. Kitchen appliances, metal tools, small items that endured the inferno. If these ordinary objects had survived, how had every trace of 5 human bodies supposedly been destroyed? The contradiction haunted him. So did something else. Witnesses slowly began approaching the family, one after another, not with condolences, with stories. Stories they had been uncertain whether to tell. One woman claimed she had seen the missing children looking out of a passing car while the fire was still consuming the house. Another reported seeing unfamiliar men near the Sodder property before the blaze. A hotel employee later insisted that several children matching the missing siblings had checked into a motel with 2 adults shortly after Christmas. None of these reports could immediately be verified. None could be completely dismissed either. For George and Jenny Sodder, hope became both a blessing and a curse. If the children had died, they deserved certainty. If they had lived, every hour that passed meant they were farther away. Standing in the cold remains of what had once been his family home, George made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would reject the official conclusion. He would spend every remaining year searching for answers. Because deep inside, beyond grief, beyond reason, beyond every comforting explanation offered by investigators, one unbearable thought refused to die. What if the fire had never been the real crime? What if it had only been the perfect distraction? The ashes had barely cooled before the official narrative began to harden into certainty. 5 children had died in a tragic Christmas fire. The cause, authorities insisted, was faulty wiring. The case was over. The town mourned, newspapers moved on, and life was expected to continue. But George Sodder refused to let the silence settle. Every morning he returned to the ruins, walking across the frozen ground where his home had once stood. He searched with blistered hands, lifting charred boards, broken bricks, twisted metal, anything that might answer the question consuming every waking moment. If 5 children had truly died there, where were they? The answer never came. Instead, another contradiction emerged. George contacted funeral directors and cremation specialists, asking them a question few grieving fathers would ever think to ask. Under extreme heat, what happens to the human body? The responses varied in technical detail, but one conclusion remained remarkably consistent. Even in modern crematoriums, where temperatures are carefully controlled between roughly 1,400 and 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit and bodies are exposed for hours, bones are not reduced entirely to dust. After cremation, skeletal fragments remain and must be mechanically processed into fine ashes families ultimately receive. The Sodder house fire had burned intensely, but not under controlled conditions of an industrial crematorium. To George, that mattered. If professionals still recovered bones after deliberate cremation, How could an ordinary house fire erase every trace of 5 children? The official explanation seemed increasingly impossible. Jenny struggled differently. She replayed every decision from Christmas Eve, searching for the exact moment when fate could have been changed. She remembered telling the children they could stay downstairs a little longer. She remembered the strange phone call. She remembered hearing the loud thud on the roof before drifting back to sleep. Every memory became another weight she carried into the sleepless nights that followed. Neither parent spoke much about guilt. They didn't need to. It filled every quiet moment between them. Then the rumors began. At first, they spread cautiously, passed from neighbor to neighbor in hushed conversations at grocery stores and church gatherings. Most dismissed them as the desperate fantasies that often surround unsolved tragedies. Yet some stories refused to disappear. A woman claimed she had driven past the Sada home while it was burning. According to her, she saw people watching from a passing automobile parked some distance away. She thought little of it at the time. Only after hearing that 5 children were supposedly trapped inside did the image return to her with disturbing clarity. Who had been sitting inside that car? Why had they remained there? And why had they driven away? No one knew. Another witness came forward with an even stranger account. A local bus driver reported seeing several people throwing what appeared to be balls of fire toward the Sada house during the night. At first, investigators dismissed the statement as confusion created by darkness and panic. Then George remembered the sound. That heavy thump on the roof. The noise that had awakened Jenny before the fire erupted. Months later, one of the Sada sons reportedly discovered an object near the property that resembled a military-style incendiary device, sometimes described as a pineapple bomb or similar explosive component. Exactly what the object was has been debated for decades, and no conclusive forensic examination ever settled the question. But to George, it fit the memory too perfectly. A loud impact, a short delay, then fire. Could the blaze have been deliberately started? The possibility transformed everything. If the fire was intentional, then every unexplained event surrounding that night demanded a second look, including the missing ladder. George insisted the ladder was always stored beside the house. Firefighters never used it because it was gone before they arrived. Days later, according to the family, it was reportedly found some distance away, lying in an embankment where George insisted he had never placed it. Someone had moved it. Whether it was a prank, an accident, or something far more sinister remained impossible to prove. Then there were the trucks. Mechanics later examined them after George insisted they had been sabotaged. Some accounts suggested wiring or mechanical components may have been tampered with, while others argued the engine simply failed because of heat panic or unrelated mechanical issues. No definitive conclusion was ever reached. Yet the timing continued to haunt investigators who revisited the case decades later. 2 reliable trucks, both refusing to start, on the only night George desperately needed them. Coincidence? Perhaps. But coincidences were beginning to pile up. George's attention soon shifted to something else that had troubled him for weeks. The fire chief's actions. The Fayetteville Fire Department did not arrive until long after the house had collapsed. The explanation sounded almost unbelievable by modern standards. The town lacked an immediate emergency dispatch system. Firefighters had to be contacted through a chain of telephone calls. By the time personnel assembled and equipment reached the property, the blaze had already consumed nearly everything. George understood delays. He did not understand the investigation that followed. Officials searched only briefly before declaring the missing children dead. No extensive excavation. No prolonged forensic examination. No outside specialists. No effort to explain the missing remains. The conclusion seemed to come first. Evidence appeared to follow afterward. Determined to find answers authorities would not pursue, George hired private experts. Some questioned the official findings. Others urged caution. Without physical evidence, no one could definitively state the children had survived. But neither could anyone definitively prove they had died inside the fire. That uncertainty became the foundation of everything that followed. Then another disturbing piece entered the puzzle. Months before the fire, George had experienced encounters he had initially dismissed as odd. One insurance salesman became unusually aggressive after George refused to buy a policy. According to George, the man allegedly warned him that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. The exact wording has varied in retellings over the decades, but the threat itself remained one of the family's most unsettling memories. At the time, George considered it little more than anger over losing a sale. After Christmas Eve, it sounded entirely different. Another incident resurfaced. A man seeking work had examined the electrical system around the house sometime before the fire, instead of discussing employment. He reportedly pointed toward the fuse box and claimed it was dangerous. George found the comment strange because professional inspections had recently found no major problems. After the fire was blamed on faulty wiring, that conversation suddenly seemed much more significant. Were these merely disconnected events? Or had someone already been studying the property long before Christmas? Questions multiplied faster than investigators could answer them. Then came perhaps the most controversial theory of all, George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. Throughout Fayetteville and neighboring communities lived immigrants with differing political loyalties. While World War II had ended, emotions surrounding fascism remained raw. George never concealed his hatred for Mussolini's regime. Heated arguments reportedly occurred over the years. Could those political disputes possibly have escalated into something unimaginable? Some believed the idea bordered on conspiracy. Others refused to dismiss it entirely. No evidence directly connected political enemies to the fire. But George never forgot the hostility he had encountered, especially not after the threats. Meanwhile, Jenny clung to a different kind of evidence. Instinct. She insisted she would have heard the children calling if they had been trapped upstairs. The staircase had burned rapidly, but the bedrooms overlooked areas where voices should have carried. No desperate screams. No shattered windows. No cries for help. Only fire. Silence itself became suspicious. Investigators countered that smoke inhalation could have overcome the children almost immediately. Experts debated the possibility for years. Without bodies, no one could reconstruct their final moments. Without certainty, every explanation remained incomplete. As winter gave way to spring, the Sodders realized something devastating. Public sympathy was beginning to fade. People preferred the official version. It was easier. 5 children had died. A terrible accident. Nothing more. The alternative required accepting something almost impossible. That 5 children had somehow disappeared during one of the most chaotic fires imaginable without anyone noticing. Yet the Sodders continued searching. George contacted law enforcement agencies beyond West Virginia. Jenny answered every letter personally. They followed every rumor, every anonymous tip, every whispered sighting. Each new lead briefly reignited hope before collapsing under scrutiny. Still, they refused to stop, because beneath every unanswered question lay one undeniable fact. Not a single piece of physical evidence had ever conclusively placed the 5 missing children inside the ashes. That fact alone separated the Sodder case from thousands of other fatal house fires. Most tragedies end with funerals. The Sodders had no bodies to bury, no grave to visit, no certainty to mourn, only absence. And sometimes absence becomes more powerful than evidence itself. Months after the fire, George made another decision that shocked friends and neighbors alike. He refused to rebuild his life in the ordinary sense. Instead of accepting the official conclusion, he transformed his grief into a relentless investigation. Every conversation became an interview. Every stranger became a possible witness. Every rumor became a trail worth following. His search was no longer driven only by hope. It was driven by conviction. Somewhere beyond the mountains of West Virginia, he believed the truth was still alive. Whether that truth would lead to 5 children, to a criminal conspiracy, or to an answer no one had yet imagined remained unknown. But George Sauter had crossed a point of no return. He no longer viewed Christmas Eve 1945 as a tragic accident. He viewed it as the opening move of a mystery that someone, somewhere, had worked very hard to conceal. The longer George and Jenny Sauter searched, the more they realized they were fighting 2 battles at once. One was against time. The other was against certainty. Every official record declared their 5 youngest children dead. Every passing year made witnesses less reliable, memories less precise, and physical evidence harder to recover. Yet the family could not escape the feeling that the truth had slipped through someone's fingers before anyone had even bothered to hold on to it. Spring turned into summer, and the ruins of the Sauter home became more than a reminder of loss. They became a crime scene in George's mind, a place where questions had been buried long before investigators arrived. Then another decision changed the course of the family's search. Unsatisfied with the original examination, George hired an independent investigator to inspect the site more thoroughly. The investigator sifted through what remained beneath the collapsed foundation, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. During that search, several small bone fragments were reportedly recovered. At first glance, it seemed the mystery had finally reached its conclusion, but the findings only deepened it. According to later examinations cited in various accounts, the fragments were determined to be inconsistent with what investigators would have expected if 5 children had perished in the fire. Some reports suggested the bones showed little evidence of prolonged exposure to the intense heat that had destroyed the house. Other accounts claimed the fragments may have originated from only one individual or may not even have been connected to the missing children at all. The historical record remains disputed, and no definitive forensic conclusion resolved the issue. What mattered to George was simple. If these fragments had not come from his children, then where were his children? The question refused to die. Meanwhile, another witness stepped forward with an account that sounded almost unbelievable. A woman operating a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed she had seen several children matching the missing siblings on the morning after fire. They were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men in a car bearing out-of-state license plates. She remembered trying to speak to the children. The adults immediately cut off the conversation. They looked frightened, she would later recall. Her statement could never be fully verified. Neither could it be completely disproved. Another lead emerged hundreds of miles away. An employee at a hotel claimed that, shortly after Christmas, 5 children resembling the Sauter siblings had stayed there with 2 adults. The adults refused housekeeping service. They appeared nervous. They checked out before dawn. Again, no photographs. No registration records that survived. Only memory. To investigators, the reports were weak. To George and Jenny, they were impossible to ignore. Hope is a dangerous thing. For families of missing persons, hope refuses to follow rules. It grows from whispers, from coincidences, from faces glimpsed across crowded streets. Every child with similar hair, every familiar smile, every anonymous phone call. Hope convinces parents to chase possibilities others would dismiss within seconds. The Sauters chase them all. Weeks became months. Months became years. Their search stretched across state lines. Private investigators were hired. Letters poured into police departments. Photographs of the missing children were mailed across the country. Every promising lead dissolved into uncertainty. Still they continued. George's determination soon became known far beyond West Virginia. Newspapers occasionally revisited the story, often framing it as one of America's strangest unsolved disappearances. Readers were captivated by the contradictions. No bodies, No convincing explanation. A devastating fire that seemed to answer nothing. Then another troubling detail resurfaced. The mysterious telephone call. Telephone company employees reportedly examined available records, but tracing calls in rural America during the mid-1940s was a difficult task. Whatever information might have existed was either unavailable or never conclusively linked to the case. Who had called Jenny just before the fire? Why had the woman laughed? Why ask for someone who had never lived there? Some investigators wonder whether the call had been intended to ensure someone inside the house was awake. Others suggested it may simply have been a coincidence with no connection at all. Without evidence, both possibilities remain speculation. The same uncertainty surrounded the object striking the roof. Years later, some researchers theorized it could have been an incendiary device similar to those used during World War II. Others argued it may have been debris, ice, or an unrelated object made more memorable by trauma. No forensic testing could settle the debate. The roof itself had long since disappeared. The physical evidence was gone. Only memory remained. As George continued examining every inconsistency, he became increasingly convinced that the children had never died inside the burning house. But if they had escaped, how? The staircase had become impassable within minutes. The front entrance was engulfed in flames. No witnesses reported seeing children running from the building, unless someone had removed them before the fire reached its full intensity. That theory seemed impossible. Yet so had the disappearance itself. George began reconstructing the timeline repeatedly. The children stayed downstairs after the adults went to bed. Jenny answered a strange phone call around 12:30 a.m. She noticed lights still on before returning upstairs. The loud thud followed sometime later. Then came the fire. Between those moments existed a window of time no one could fully account for. What happened during those minutes? Were the children still inside? Or had something already begun unfolding beyond the walls of the house? The family never stopped asking. Neither did the public. As newspapers revisited the mystery, amateur investigators started proposing theories of their own. Some believed organized criminals had abducted the children. Others suspected a personal vendetta against George. A few argued that the fire itself had been staged specifically to conceal a kidnapping. There were even suggestions that the children had been separated and raised under new identities far from West Virginia. None of these theories could be confirmed. But unlike the official explanation, they attempted to address the central mystery: the missing bodies. Years after the tragedy, George made perhaps his boldest move yet. Along a major highway near Fayetteville, he erected an enormous billboard. It displayed the faces of the 5 missing children. Beneath their photographs appeared a reward that eventually reached thousands of dollars, a fortune for the era. The sign stood where thousands of motorists would see it every year. Drivers slowed. Families pointed. Travelers remembered. The billboard transformed the solder case from a local tragedy into a national mystery. No one entering Fayetteville could avoid the haunting faces staring back across the road. For decades, they remained there, a permanent challenge to the official version of events. The reward generated another wave of tips. Letters arrived from nearly every corner of the United States. Some were sincere. Others were cruel hoaxes. A few described children seen in distant cities. One claimed the siblings were living in Florida. Another insisted they had been transported to New York. Investigators chased what they could. Nothing produced definitive proof. Still, George refused to lower the reward. He believed someone knew something. Someone had stayed silent for too long. The emotional toll on the surviving children became increasingly apparent. They grew up in the shadow of unanswered questions. Every Christmas carried painful memories. Every family gathering reminded them of those who were absent. Their parents rarely allowed the mystery to rest. Conversations returned to it constantly. Vacations became investigative trips. Ordinary mail might contain another lead. A ringing telephone could change everything. The disappearance shaped the family's identity, not because of what they knew, because of what they did not. Years passed. The children who had vanished, if alive, would now be teenagers, then adults, then parents themselves. The possibilities seemed harder to imagine with each passing birthday. Yet George's conviction never weakened. Friends sometimes urged him to move on. He couldn't. Moving on required certainty. He had none. Then came another report that reignited the family's hopes. A woman claimed she had encountered a young man in a bar who spoke about being one of the missing Sodder children. According to her recollection, he appeared frightened and refused to elaborate before disappearing into the crowd. No name, no address, no way to identify him afterward. Another ghost, another unanswered question. As investigators revisited witness statements, one pattern slowly emerged. Many sightings placed groups of children traveling with unfamiliar adults shortly after Christmas 1945. Individually, the reports meant little. Collectively, they painted an unsettling possibility. If they were all mistaken, it was an extraordinary coincidence. If even one were accurate, the entire case changed. Because then the fire had never been about death. It had been about disappearance. The Sodders continued living with that possibility every single day. George's business survived. Life moved forward in practical ways. But emotionally, Christmas Eve never ended. The clock remained frozen sometime after midnight, when a telephone rang, an unknown object struck a roof, and 5 children stepped into history without leaving footprints anyone could follow. Some mysteries fade because evidence disappears. Others endure because every new discovery creates even larger questions. The Sodder case belonged firmly to the second kind. With every year that passed, certainty drifted farther away. Yet somewhere beyond the endless rumors, conflicting testimony, and fading memories, one possibility continued haunting everyone willing to examine the evidence closely. Perhaps someone had succeeded in committing the perfect crime, not by hiding a body, but by making the world believe there had never been one to find. The billboard stood above the highway like a silent witness that refused to forget. Drivers traveling through Fayetteville saw the same 5 young faces staring back at them year after year. Beneath the photographs was a promise from 2 parents who had never accepted the official conclusion. A substantial reward waited for anyone who could provide information leading to the missing children. For many families, a tragedy slowly becomes a memory. For George and Jenny Sodder, memory became a mission. The sign ensured that the mystery never truly disappeared. Every few weeks another letter arrived. Some came neatly typed. Others were handwritten in shaky ink. Many contained only a single sentence. I think I saw one of your children. Most turned into dead ends. A few refused to be forgotten. One letter described a young woman who strongly resembled Martha Sodder working in the Midwest. Another claimed that Lewis had been seen in Texas under a different name. Yet another insisted several of the children had been transported south shortly after Christmas. None of the reports could be independently verified, but they all shared one disturbing similarity. Every witness believed the children were alive after the fire. Investigators struggled with an uncomfortable reality. Human memory is unreliable. Eyewitnesses often confuse faces, dates, and places. As months become years, recollections change, details merge together, and certainty becomes confidence without proof. The Sodder investigation was now entering dangerous territory, where genuine observations mix with rumor, coincidence, and wishful thinking. Still, not every lead could be dismissed so easily. One report came from a woman who operated a small roadside establishment. She insisted she had served breakfast to 5 children accompanied by 2 adults shortly after Christmas Day 1945. She remembered the children because they appeared unusually quiet. Whenever she tried speaking directly to them, one of the adults answered instead. The atmosphere, she later recalled, felt wrong. Not openly violent, just controlled. As though conversation itself was being monitored. She did not recognize the children from newspaper photographs until later. By then, whoever they were had vanished. Investigators attempted to retrace the route. Nothing remained. No receipts. No registration. No physical evidence. Only another memory added to an already impossible collection. George refused to ignore any of it. He drove thousands of miles over following years, chasing names that turned into strangers and addresses that led nowhere. Friends wondered how long he could continue. The answer became obvious. As long as he was alive. The family's determination eventually attracted national attention. Newspapers from outside West Virginia began revisiting the case, fascinated by the contradictions that still lacked satisfactory explanations. Reporters asked the same questions readers asked. Why had no bodies been recovered? Why had 2 trucks failed simultaneously? Why had the latter disappeared? Why did witnesses continue reporting sightings? The mystery seemed to grow larger with every anniversary. Then another overlooked detail resurfaced. The telephone line. During the original investigation, authorities assumed the fire had damaged the house's telephone connection. It seemed logical. Fire destroys wires. Except someone eventually discovered something unexpected. According to later accounts associated with the case, the telephone line had not simply burned. It appeared to have been cut. If accurate, that single detail changed the timeline dramatically. A line severed by fire suggests an accident. A line cut beforehand suggests preparation. Exactly when the damage occurred has remained disputed, and the historical record has never fully resolved the question. But for George, it confirmed what he had believed from the beginning. Someone had planned this. Meanwhile, specialists continued debating the fire itself. House fires spread unpredictably. Wood frame homes from the 1940s often burned with astonishing speed. Once flames entered wall cavities and attic spaces, escape became extraordinarily difficult. Fire experts acknowledged that point. Yet some also noted that total destruction of every trace of multiple victims remained highly unusual. The debate never reached consensus. The lack of preserved forensic evidence made definitive conclusions impossible. The passage of time only made matters worse. Modern fire investigation techniques did not exist in 1945. The original scene had not been documented according to standards investigators would later consider essential. Photographs were limited. Evidence collection was minimal. Potential clues disappeared beneath bulldozers, weather, and decades of neglect. The greatest mystery had become almost impossible to reconstruct. Still, George continued asking questions no official report had answered. Why did the fire spread so rapidly? Why had the upstairs reportedly collapsed so quickly? Why had no one heard sustained screams from the children's bedrooms? Could they have escaped another way? Or had they never been there when the flames reached the second floor? The more George studied the timeline, the more he questioned the basic assumption. Everyone believed the children went upstairs after playing with their Christmas gifts. But who actually saw them enter their bedrooms? Jenny had gone to sleep first. George followed. The surviving older siblings were already upstairs or asleep themselves. No witness could definitively state that the 5 younger children had reached their beds. That gap, small as it seemed, became one of the most discussed elements of the case. It opened a possibility investigators had largely ignored. If the children remained downstairs longer than expected, someone could have encountered them before the fire intensified. It remained only a theory. But theories filled the space where evidence had vanished. The Sodder children themselves became frozen in time. Their photographs circulated across America for years. Smiling faces, school portraits, family snapshots. Each image represented a life interrupted before anyone knew how the story ended. Unlike homicide investigations with identified victims, this case offered no certainty. No funeral service would close emotional chapters. No confirmed graves. Only unanswered birthdays. The surviving siblings carried that uncertainty into adulthood. Some remembered Christmas Eve vividly. Others remembered only fragments. Trauma reshapes memory. Children process catastrophe differently than adults. Even within the family, recollections sometimes differed. Investigators attempting to reconstruct the night encountered inevitable inconsistencies. That was normal, but uncertainty made every discrepancy appear more significant than it might otherwise have been. Outside the family, speculation intensified. One theory focused on organized crime. George's trucking business required frequent travel and commercial relationships across state lines. Some wondered whether business disputes had escalated into retaliation. No evidence ever established such a connection. Another theory pointed toward personal revenge. George had argued with numerous people over politics, business, and local matters. Most disagreements ended as words. Had one finally become something worse? Again, no proof. Only possibility. Then there was the most disturbing scenario of all. Kidnapping. Not for ransom. Not for money. But for reasons no one fully understood. Supporters of this theory argued that the fire may have been intended as a distraction rather than the primary crime. Critics countered with obvious objections. Removing 5 children from a house at night without waking adults seemed extraordinarily difficult. Keeping such a crime secret for decades seemed even harder. Yet impossible cases often force investigators to consider unlikely explanations, because ordinary ones fail. As years passed, advances in forensic science transformed criminal investigations across America. Blood typing improved. Fingerprint analysis expanded. Later, DNA technology revolutionized cold cases. The Sodder disappearance, however, belonged to another era. The crucial evidence had either never been collected or no longer existed. Modern science could solve only what remained. Very little remained. Journalists periodically interviewed George and Jenny, expecting grief softened by time. Instead, they encountered determination. George spoke with remarkable consistency. He did not claim to know exactly what had happened. He claimed only that the official explanation failed to explain the evidence. That distinction mattered. He was not offering certainty. He was demanding it. Jenny, meanwhile, preserved the children's belongings whenever possible. Photographs stayed carefully protected. Memories stayed alive inside the home. Christmas was never celebrated quite the same way again. Every holiday carried an invisible absence. 5 unopened futures. 5 missing voices. 5 unanswered names. The investigation, if it could still be called one, had become something larger than a search for suspects. It had become a struggle against forgetting. Every year that passed reduced the number of living witnesses. Every funeral erased another possible source of information. Every demolished building removed another piece of historical context. Time itself had become the greatest obstacle. Yet, sometimes time produces unexpected consequences. People who remain silent for years occasionally begin talking. Consciences change. Secrets become burdens. Old loyalties fade. George believed that someday someone would decide they had carried the truth long enough. He waited. The reward remained. The billboard remained. The hope remained. And somewhere beyond West Virginia, whether hidden beneath an assumed identity or lost forever inside a story no one had yet uncovered. The fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sauter continued casting a shadow far longer than anyone thought possible. Because every unsolved mystery eventually reaches the same crossroads. Either the evidence disappears forever, or one forgotten detail survives just long enough to change everything. By the early 1950s, the Sauter case had evolved into something far beyond a local tragedy. It had become one of those rare American mysteries that refused to disappear. Newspapers periodically revisited the story, radio programs debated the unanswered questions, and ordinary families across the country found themselves wondering what they would do if they refused to believe what the authorities had declared. For George and Jenny Sauter, refusing to believe was no longer a choice. It had become the only way they knew how to live. Every anniversary of the fire reopened the same wound. December arrived. Christmas decorations appeared in shop windows. Children laughed in schoolyards. Church bells echoed through Fayetteville just as they had in 1945. For everyone else, another year had passed. For the Sauters, time always returned to the same night. Then, nearly 2 decades after the fire, something arrived in the family's mailbox that would become the most famous piece of evidence ever associated with the case. It was an ordinary envelope. No return address. Postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a single photograph. The image showed a young man, perhaps in his 20s. Dark hair. Dark eyes. A serious expression. Nothing about the photograph would have attracted attention, except for what was written on the back. In careful handwriting appeared a message that has fascinated investigators for generations. Louis Sauter, I love Brother Frankie. Illo boys, a 90132 or 35. The wording was cryptic. The grammar made little sense. The meaning of the numbers remains unknown. No explanation accompanied the photograph. No letter. No signature. Nothing identifying the sender. George and Jenny stared at the image for hours. They believed they were looking at Louis. Not because they wanted to believe, because they genuinely saw familiar features. The shape of the nose. The eyes. The jawline. To grieving parents, resemblance can be deceptive. To George and Jenny, it felt undeniable. They immediately contacted experts to compare childhood photographs of Louis with the unknown young man. Some believed the facial characteristics were consistent. Others urged caution. Photographic comparison, especially across decades of aging, is far from conclusive. Without DNA or confirmed identity, no expert could declare the man to be Louis Sauter. Yet no expert could eliminate the possibility either. The family's hope exploded once again. George hired a private investigator and reportedly sent him to Kentucky to trace the photograph's origin. The investigator left. He never returned with answers. Accounts differ regarding exactly what happened afterward. Some later narratives claim contact was lost entirely. Others suggest the trail simply reached a dead end. Whatever the truth, the investigation produced no verified breakthrough. The photograph remained exactly what it had been on the day it arrived. A possibility. Nothing more. Nothing less. George enlarged the image and placed it alongside earlier photographs of Louis. Visitors to the Sauter home often found the comparison unsettling. The similarities were difficult to ignore. But similarities are not proof. The mystery endured. Meanwhile, journalists digging deeper into the case uncovered additional inconsistencies in the original investigation. One of the most controversial involved the handling of the fire scene itself. Not long after the fire, the site had reportedly been covered with several feet of dirt before a thorough forensic excavation could ever be conducted. George himself had arranged to fill the cellar area with soil, intending eventually to build a memorial garden over property. At the time, he believed authorities had already completed their examination. Years later, Critics argued that the decision, combined with the limited investigative standards of the era, made future forensic analysis extraordinarily difficult. Whether important evidence was lost forever can never be known. The opportunity was gone. Another issue concerned official documentation. Modern investigators rely heavily on photographs, scene mapping, laboratory reports, and preserved evidence. In 1945, much of that simply did not exist. Records were limited. Procedures varied widely between jurisdictions. Small-town departments lacked resources available today. The Sodder case became a textbook example of how critical evidence can vanish before anyone realizes its importance. As public fascination grew, theories multiplied. One popular hypothesis suggested the children had been kidnapped by individuals connected to George's political disputes. George had openly criticized Benito Mussolini even before Italy entered the Second World War. His opinions had earned him enemies among certain members of the Italian immigrant community. Supporters of this theory believed retaliation had escalated beyond threats. Critics point out the absence of direct evidence linking any political group to the disappearance. No arrests, no confessions, no documents, no verified witnesses. The theory remained possible but unproven. Another explanation centered on organized crime. During the 1940s, criminal networks operated across several regions of the United States, particularly in industries involving transportation, gambling, and labor. George's trucking business naturally fueled speculation. Could he have crossed paths with dangerous individuals? Could dispute have escalated into an act designed to send a message? Again, investigators found no definitive evidence. But they could not completely dismiss the possibility. The lack of answers encouraged increasingly elaborate theories. Some became so sensational that even the Sodder family rejected them. George wanted evidence, not fantasies. The surviving children watched all this unfold while trying to build ordinary lives. School classmates occasionally asked uncomfortable questions. Newspaper reporters knocked on doors. Complete strangers offered opinions about what had happened to their missing siblings. Grief became public property. Every family gathering included invisible guests. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty. 5 empty places that never disappeared. Then another development attracted attention. Independent researchers began consulting forensic specialists about the conditions required to destroy human remains completely. The conclusions were remarkably similar to those George had heard years earlier. House fires, even severe ones, rarely eliminate every identifiable fragment of multiple victims. Temperatures fluctuate. Structural collapse interrupts burning. Objects shield portions of the body. Complete destruction is uncommon. None of this proved the children survived. It simply challenged the assumption that no remains automatically meant complete incineration. The distinction mattered enormously, because the fire alone could not explain the absence of remains. Something else had to. Yet another overlooked detail resurfaced during interviews with witnesses. Several people remembered seeing unfamiliar individuals around the Sodder property in the days leading up to Christmas. One reportedly observed a man studying the house from the roadside. Another remembered someone asking unusual questions about the children's schedules. Human memory after many years is fragile. Investigators treated such recollections cautiously. Still, taken together, they suggested the possibility that the family had been observed before the fire. Whether by coincidence or intention remained impossible to determine. George's health slowly began to decline as the years passed. The physical scars from the fire had long since healed. The emotional ones had not. Friends noticed that conversations almost always returned to the missing children. He remembered birthdays, favorite games, Christmas presents left unopened, tiny details others would eventually forget. He refused to let memory fade. Jenny carried her own rituals. She reportedly kept the curtains in the family home open each night for years, believing that if the children ever returned, they should see a welcoming light. Whether every detail of that tradition has been perfectly preserved in historical accounts is difficult to verify. What is certain is that hope remained woven into nearly every aspect of the family's daily life. Hope became exhausting. Hope became painful. Hope also became impossible to abandon. By now, if the missing children were alive, they would be adults. They might have families, careers, entire lives built under different names. Would they remember Christmas Eve? Would they remember Fayetteville? Would they even know they had once been called Sodder? The questions became more heartbreaking with each passing decade. Investigators examining the case from a modern perspective often arrive at the same conclusion. There is no single piece of evidence strong enough to establish what happened. Instead, there are dozens of smaller anomalies. The strange telephone call, the object striking the roof, the delayed fire response, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the disputed telephone line, the absence of remains, the witness sightings, the anonymous photograph. Individually, each mystery might be explained. Together, they create one of the most perplexing cold cases in American history. And perhaps that is why the Sodder disappearance continues to fascinate investigators. Not because one clue changes everything, but because none of the clues fit together in a way that fully explains the night 5 children vanished. Somewhere within those contradictions, hidden beneath decades of fading memories and incomplete records, lies the truth. Whether it points toward tragedy, conspiracy, or a sequence of extraordinary coincidences remains unknown. But one fact has never changed. Long after the flames died, long after the newspapers moved on, and long after Christmas morning became a permanent scar on one family's life, the most important question remained exactly where it had begun. If 5 children truly died in that fire, why has no one ever been able to prove it? As the decades passed, the Sodder case entered a strange new phase. It was no longer simply an active search for 5 missing children. It became a historical mystery, one examined by journalists, retired detectives, fire investigators, and ordinary citizens who believed that somewhere inside the conflicting accounts lay a single overlooked truth. Every new generation approached the case with fresh eyes, only to discover that the same unanswered questions had survived untouched. The fire belonged to the past. The mystery did not. By the 1960s, America itself had changed dramatically. The nation that had celebrated the end of World War II now lived through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, and rapid advances in science and technology. Criminal investigations were becoming increasingly sophisticated. Forensic laboratories improved. Fire investigators began studying burn patterns with greater precision. Missing person investigations evolved into specialized disciplines. George watched these developments with mixed emotions. Every advancement represented hope. Every advancement also reminded him that the most critical evidence from Christmas Eve 1945 had been lost before such techniques even existed. Had the fire occurred 20 years later, investigators would likely have photographed every room in detail, preserved debris for laboratory testing, documented witness statements more systematically, and examined the scene using methods unavailable in the 1940s. Instead, much of the evidence had disappeared forever. That reality frustrated everyone who later studied the case. Modern investigators reviewing the available records often found themselves asking not only what happened, but what had never been examined in the first place. The missing children remained at the center of every discussion. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty. If alive, they were now adults in their 30s, old enough to have careers, families, children of their own. The possibility was almost impossible to imagine. How could 5 children disappear so completely that none ever contacted relatives again? Supporters of the kidnapping theory offered several possibilities. Perhaps the children had been raised under new identities. Perhaps they had been told their parents were dead. Perhaps fear had kept them silent. Critics pointed to equally difficult questions. Keeping one abducted child hidden is extraordinarily difficult. Keeping 5 hidden for decades borders on unimaginable. Someone would talk. Someone would make a mistake. Someone would eventually come forward. Yet no confirmed reunion ever occurred. No verified confession surfaced. The silence itself became another mystery. George understood the objections. He simply believed the official explanation contained even greater problems. Meanwhile, independent researchers began revisiting witness testimony from a night of fire. One statement attracted renewed attention. Several individuals had reportedly noticed unusual vehicles in the area before and after the blaze. Descriptions varied. Some mentioned dark-colored cars. Others recalled out-of-state license plates. Unfortunately, memories recorded years after the event rarely aligned perfectly. Without registration records or physical evidence, investigators could do little beyond documenting the accounts. Still, one question lingered. If strangers had indeed been near the Sodder property that night, why? Coincidence remained possible. Preparation remained possible too. The lack of certainty defined every aspect of the case. Then attention returned to George himself. Friends often described him as stubborn, determined, relentless. Some believed grief had prevented him from accepting reality. Others argued that his persistence reflected something investigators had overlooked. George never claimed to possess proof. He pointed to inconsistencies. He challenged assumptions. He insisted unanswered questions deserved answers. That distinction became increasingly important as the years passed. The case was no longer about proving a particular theory. It was about acknowledging that the existing explanation failed to account for every known fact. Journalists interviewing fire experts encountered similar caution. Could a house fire destroy nearly all human remains? Yes, under certain circumstances, extensive damage is possible. Could it completely eliminate every recognizable trace of 5 children? Experts disagreed. Some believed it was extremely unlikely. Others warned against drawing firm conclusions without complete forensic data. The original evidence simply no longer existed. Science could not examine ashes that had long since vanished. It could only evaluate probabilities. Probabilities are not verdicts. They are possibilities. And the Sodder case had become a collection of possibilities rather than certainties. As public interest endured, the family's famous billboard remained standing. Weather slowly faded the photographs. Rain darkened the wood. Snow covered the reward noticed each winter. Yet the faces remained recognizable. Travelers stopped to read. Children asked their parents what had happened. The mystery passed from one generation to the next. For many Americans driving through West Virginia, the billboard became their first introduction to the disappearance. Some mailed tips years later after suddenly remembering unusual encounters from decades earlier. Most produced nothing. A few sparked cautious optimism before collapsing under investigation. George chased them anyway. Every lead deserved attention. One anonymous caller claimed that one of the missing children had been seen working in the Northeast under a different surname. Another insisted a family resemblance had been noticed in the Deep South. Private investigators attempted to verify what they could. Names failed to match. Dates conflicted. Photographs proved inconclusive. Hope rose. Hope fell. The cycle repeated endlessly. Jenny experienced the mystery differently. While George searched outward, she often searched inward. She replayed conversations, expressions, tiny moments from Christmas Eve. Did one of the children seem frightened? Did anyone mention seeing strangers earlier that week? Had she overlooked a warning hidden inside an ordinary day? Trauma has a cruel habit of transforming ordinary memories into endless questions. Every forgotten detail begins to feel significant. Every routine decision becomes a possible turning point. There were no answers waiting inside those memories, only echoes. As time moved forward, another generation of investigators examined the political context surrounding George's outspoken anti-fascist views. Some historians acknowledge that tensions within immigrant communities during the era could become deeply personal. Arguments over Mussolini and the future of Italy divided friendships and families alike. Could such hostility have escalated into violence? The historical record provides no direct evidence linking political rivals to the disappearance. Still, the threats George reportedly received before the fire remain part of the discussion. Whether they represented genuine danger or angry rhetoric has never been conclusively established. Without corroborating evidence, historians continue treating the connection cautiously. The same caution surrounded organized crime theories. The mid-20th century witnessed criminal organizations operating across several states. Transportation businesses occasionally intersected with illegal enterprises. But speculation is not evidence. Researchers repeatedly return to the same obstacle. No document, no confession, no witness. Nothing directly connected George's business activities to the disappearance. Theories accumulated. Proof remained absent. By now, the solder case had become an unusual challenge for investigators. Most cold cases revolve around identifying a suspect. This one struggled even to establish the crime itself. Was it accidental death? Kidnapping? Arson? Multiple crimes committed simultaneously? The answer to the first question determined every question that followed. Without resolving the beginning, investigators could never confidently explain the ending. The surviving Sodder children carried the burden quietly. As adults, they often found themselves repeating the same story to curious strangers. The same Christmas Eve, the same fire, the same unanswered questions. Their childhood had become public history. People recognized the family name. Some offered sympathy. Others offered theories. Few offered certainty. Time continued taking its toll. Witnesses passed away. Investigators retired. Documents disappeared into archives. Buildings changed. Roads were rebuilt. Even Fayetteville itself slowly transformed around the memory of the fire. But Christmas Eve 1945 remained frozen inside the American imagination. Because unlike most tragedies, it refused to offer closure. Every anniversary invited another newspaper article, another television segment, another debate. Could 5 children truly vanish forever? Or had everyone been searching in the wrong direction from the very beginning? George grew older. His determination never faded. Friends noticed that whenever the conversation turned toward ordinary matters, his attention eventually drifted back to the children. Not to grief, to evidence. He remembered timelines, witness names, statements, dates. His search had evolved into something almost investigative. He had spent so many years studying the case that few people knew its details better than he did. Still, knowledge alone could not solve it. The truth, wherever existed, remained just beyond reach, like footprints disappearing into fresh snow before anyone arrived to follow them. And somewhere beyond faded photographs, anonymous letters, conflicting testimony, and memories worn thin by decades, one possibility refused to disappear. Perhaps the greatest clue had never been hidden at all. Perhaps it had been dismissed on the very first day, buried beneath the simplest explanation, because no one imagined that an impossible mystery could begin with something as ordinary as a house fire. By the time the mystery entered its third decade, the 5 missing Sodder children had become adults in theory, but children forever in the eyes of the public. The photographs on the billboard never aged. Maurice remained 14. Martha stayed 12. Louis was frozen at 9. Jenny remained 8. Betty would always be 5. While the world moved forward, their faces remained trapped in the final images taken before Christmas Eve 1945. It was a haunting contrast. Somewhere, if they had survived, they would now look nothing like the children staring down from faded newspaper clippings. Every year that passed made recognizing them more difficult. Every birthday created another version of people no one had ever seen. This presented investigators with a unique problem. How do you search for someone whose face no longer exists? Age progression technology was still primitive. Computer-generated facial reconstructions belonged to the future. Investigators relied largely on artists' intuition and rough sketches of how the children might appear as adults. The results varied dramatically. Some images emphasize family resemblance. Others focus on natural aging patterns. None could be confirmed. Hope depended on imagination. The family search continued despite the odds. Letters still arrived. Telephone calls still interrupted quiet evenings. Occasionally, someone claimed to have met a man or woman who vaguely remembered growing up under unusual circumstances. Most stories unraveled almost immediately. Names failed to match. Dates conflicted. Records disprove identities. The search always returned to where it had started. 5 missing children. No confirmed trace. As the years passed, journalists covering the case noticed another curious detail. Unlike many famous disappearances, no credible ransom demand had ever emerged. No verified kidnapper contacted the family. No organization claimed responsibility. If the children had been abducted, the motive remained completely unknown. Money seemed unlikely. Political retaliation remained speculative. Personal revenge raised difficult questions. Why take the children instead of targeting George himself? Why stage a devastating fire? Why maintain silence for decades afterward? The absence of an obvious motive made every theory feel incomplete. Some researchers propose a more unsettling possibility. Perhaps the intended crime had gone wrong. Perhaps events unfolded differently than whoever planned them expected. Maybe the fire spread too quickly. Maybe witnesses appeared unexpectedly. Maybe panic altered the original plan. Without evidence, such ideas remain hypothetical. Yet they attempted to explain something the official narrative could not: the disappearance itself. Around this time, independent investigators began comparing the Sodder case with other unresolved disappearances across the United States. Patterns were difficult to establish. No similar crime perfectly matched the circumstances. There were kidnappings. There were suspicious fires. There were missing children. But rarely did all 3 elements converge in a single event. That uniqueness only strengthened public fascination. The Sodder mystery seemed to exist in a category of its own. Meanwhile, advances in forensic anthropology transformed scientific understanding of fire victims. Researchers gained better knowledge of how bones react to prolonged heat, structural collapse, and post-fire conditions. Many experts reviewing historical cases emphasize caution. Every fire behaves differently. Building materials matter. Ventilation matters. Fuel sources matter. The position of victims matters. Without the original evidence, no scientist could confidently reconstruct exactly what happened inside the Sodder home. That uncertainty worked both ways. It prevented definitive support for the official explanation. It also prevented definitive proof of kidnapping. The case remained suspended between competing possibilities. George accepted that reality. He was no longer searching for certainty. He was searching for honesty. He believed authorities had closed the investigation too quickly. He believed critical questions had never been fully examined. Whether those questions ultimately proved or disproved his suspicions almost became secondary. What mattered was that they deserved investigation. His persistence earned both admiration and criticism. Some people called him courageous. Others believed grief had become an obsession. Friends occasionally worried that hope itself had become a prison. George rarely argued. Instead, he asked a single question. If they died in the fire, were they? No one ever gave him an answer that satisfied him. As interest in cold cases grew throughout America, writers revisited older mysteries with fresh perspectives. The Sodder disappearance repeatedly appeared alongside some of the nation's most baffling unsolved cases. Readers encountered the same collection of unanswered details. The mysterious telephone call, the loud object striking the roof, the delayed fire response, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the disputed condition of the telephone line, the witness sightings, the anonymous photograph. Each fact alone might seem explainable. Together they refuse to form a coherent picture. Some investigators argued that people naturally connect unrelated events after a tragedy. Psychologists refer to this tendency as pattern seeking. The human brain dislikes randomness. It searches for meaning, linking coincidences into narratives that feel complete. Perhaps, they suggested, the Sodder case represented an extraordinary collection of unrelated coincidences surrounding a devastating accidental fire. Others disagreed. Coincidences occur, but how many coincidences become too many? That debate continues today. Another aspect of the mystery received increasing attention: the behavior of the surviving family immediately after the fire. Researchers noted that George's actions were remarkably consistent over decades. His account changed very little. The sequence of events remained largely stable despite countless interviews. Trauma often alters memory, but George repeatedly described the same unusual details. The strange call, the trucks, the ladder, the absence of remains. Consistency does not prove accuracy. Neither does it suggest fabrication. It simply became another element investigators considered. Jenny's resilience also drew admiration. Years after the tragedy, she continued preserving photographs and memories of the missing children. She refused to let them disappear from the family's daily life. Visitors sensed immediately that the house contained more than grief. It contained expectation, however faint, however improbable. Expectation that someday, somehow, someone would walk through the door. That expectation never entirely vanished. Then another generation entered the story. Grandchildren grew up hearing about the 5 missing siblings they had never met. Family history blended with mystery. Christmas traditions carried both celebration and sorrow. The disappearance was no longer just an event remembered by witnesses. It became part of the family's identity. Stories passed from parents to children. Questions passed with them. Outside the family, the case inspired amateur investigators across the country. Some traveled to Fayetteville. Others searched public records. A few attempted to trace old witness statements or identify the anonymous photograph mailed decades earlier. Every effort encountered the same obstacle: time. Time had erased documents. Time had buried evidence. Time had taken witnesses. Cold cases are difficult enough when evidence survives. The Sodder mystery demanded investigators reconstruct history from fragments. Despite these obstacles, one important conclusion gradually emerged among many researchers. The official investigation had been far too limited by modern standards. This observation does not establish that the children survived, nor does it prove criminal involvement. It simply acknowledges that many questions remain unanswered because they were never fully explored when the evidence was still fresh. That realization became one of the lasting legacies of Case. Law enforcement agencies across the United States gradually improved procedures for handling suspicious fires and missing person investigations. Better documentation, more careful evidence preservation, greater skepticism toward early assumptions. Although no single case transformed investigative practice on its own, historical mysteries like the Sodder disappearance demonstrated the consequences of premature conclusions. Sometimes what appears obvious in the first 24 hours becomes far less certain decades later. George understood that lesson better than anyone. He had lived it every day since Christmas morning, 1945. His search had outlasted investigators, outlasted newspaper editors, outlasted countless theories. The truth remained hidden somewhere beyond reach, perhaps inside a forgotten document, perhaps inside someone's guilty memory, perhaps buried forever with those who never spoke, or perhaps still waiting inside one final clue overlooked because everyone believed the mystery had already been solved before the investigation had truly begun. By the 1970s, the Sodder case had become more than an unsolved disappearance. It had become a legend, not the kind built on exaggeration or folklore, but one rooted in an unsettling reality. Every major question surrounding the case remained unanswered. Every attempt to close the file only seemed to create another loose end. Investigators changed. Reporters retired. Witnesses passed away. Yet the mystery remained stubbornly alive. For George and Jenny, however, this was never a legend. It was their family. The passage of time had changed almost everything around them. The children who survived the fire were now middle-aged adults. Fayetteville had grown. Roads had changed. Businesses had come and gone. Even the landscape surrounding the original Sodder property no longer looked exactly as it had on that freezing Christmas morning. Only memory refused to age. George still remembered the smell of smoke. Jenny still remembered the strange laughter on the telephone. Neither memory softened with time. If anything, both became sharper. Psychologists often describe traumatic memories differently from ordinary recollections. Small details remain vivid while entire stretches of time become blurred. Survivors can remember a single sound with perfect clarity, while forgetting conversations that happened only minutes earlier. That reality complicated every attempt to reconstruct Christmas Eve. Were George and Jenny's memories completely accurate? Probably not. No human memory remains untouched after decades. But neither could investigators dismiss them entirely. They represented the only surviving account of those final moments before the fire. As interest in historical cold cases increased, journalists began interviewing experts from multiple disciplines: fire investigators, criminologists, forensic anthropologists, behavioral specialists. Each approached the Sodder mystery from a different perspective. Interestingly, very few claimed absolute certainty. Instead, they spoke in probabilities. If the children died inside the house, if the remains were destroyed, if the witnesses were mistaken, if the sightings were unrelated, the case had become a series of conditional statements rather than established facts. That uncertainty frustrated everyone. Meanwhile, the anonymous photograph mailed years earlier continued attracting attention. Researchers carefully enlarged the image. Facial comparison experts examined proportions between childhood photographs of Lewis and the unidentified young man. Some believed the resemblance was striking. Others argued confirmation bias made objective comparison impossible. Parents searching for a missing child naturally want to see familiar features. Scientists caution against relying solely on visual resemblance. Without the original negative, without identifying the sender, and without locating the man himself, the photograph remained an unsolved mystery within an already unsolved mystery. Even the writing on the back generated endless debate. Louis Sauter. I love Brother Frankie. Illo Boys. A90132 or 35. Every phrase inspired competing interpretations. Was Frankie another sibling? A code? A nickname? Did the numbers represent an identification card? A prison record? Military service? A postal reference? No explanation ever satisfied investigators. The message seemed intentionally meaningful. Only no one understood its meaning. Researchers eventually attempted to trace the Kentucky postmark. By then, too much time had passed. Records no longer existed. Postal employees had long retired. The trail ended almost as soon as it began. Another opportunity lost to time. As historians revisited the broader context of 1945 America, they also considered the limitations facing rural law enforcement immediately after World War II. Many communities lacked trained forensic personnel. Evidence preservation standards were inconsistent. Fire investigations often focused primarily on determining whether a blaze appeared accidental or deliberate. Detailed forensic reconstruction, common today, was rarely possible. The Sauter investigation reflected those limitations. Modern detectives examining the case frequently noted that crucial questions had simply never been asked. Or, if they had been asked, the answers had never been documented. That absence became part of the mystery itself. Could a more thorough investigation in December 1945 have solved the case? No one can know. But many believe the chances would certainly have been greater. George never stopped believing that. His determination earned respect even among people who disagreed with his conclusions. No one doubted his devotion. He had spent decades chasing possibilities most people would have abandoned years earlier. He had invested money, time, energy, and emotion into a search with no guarantee of success. He continued because stopping would mean accepting uncertainty. That was something he simply could not do. Jenny shared the burden differently. She rarely spoke publicly with the same intensity as George, but those who knew her understood that hope remained alive. She had lived long enough to imagine each missing child as an adult. She wondered whether Maurice had become a father, whether Martha had children of her own, whether Louis remembered playing in the yard before Christmas, whether little Jenny still laughed the same way, whether Betty, the youngest, remembered anything at all. These were impossible questions. Yet they occupied countless quiet evenings. Every missing person investigation contains one cruel reality. The longer someone remains missing, the fewer opportunities remain to identify them. Faces change. Names change. Memories fade. Witnesses disappear. The Sauter case embodied every one of those challenges. Then another development added a fresh layer to the mystery. Researchers comparing witness statements noticed that several independent reports describe groups of children traveling with adults shortly after Christmas. The locations differed. The descriptions varied. Yet certain elements repeated. The children appeared unusually quiet. The accompanying adults discouraged conversation. The group continued traveling rather than staying in one place. Could unrelated witnesses have unconsciously influenced one another after reading newspaper coverage? Absolutely. Could separate reports still contain genuine observations? Also possible. Without corroborating evidence, investigators remain cautious. The sightings could neither establish nor eliminate the kidnapping theory. One issue, however, continued puzzling criminologists. If the children had indeed been abducted, why 5? Kidnapping multiple children dramatically increases complexity. It increases witnesses. It increases logistical difficulties. It increases the likelihood that someone escapes or remembers. Professional criminals generally avoid unnecessary complications. Taking 5 children from a single household during a fire would represent an extraordinarily risky operation, unless the objective required taking all of them, or unless events unfolded differently than anyone later assumed. Again, the evidence refused to settle the debate. Every theory solved one problem, while creating another. Investigators repeatedly encountered the same paradox. The accidental fire theory explained the blaze. It struggled to explain the missing remains. The kidnapping theory explained the missing remains. It struggled to explain how 5 children disappeared unnoticed. Neither account answered every question. Perhaps that is why the Sodom mystery has survived for generations. It refuses to fit comfortably into any single explanation. By now, George's health had begun declining more noticeably. Age slowed his movements, but not his determination. Visitors still found him discussing witness statements, newspaper articles, and investigative inconsistencies with remarkable precision. The mystery had become part of him. He no longer separated daily life from the search. They had merged decades earlier. Friends occasionally asked whether he believed he would ever learn the truth. His answer varied little. He hoped. Hope, however, had changed. It was no longer the hope of immediate reunion. It was the hope that someone, somewhere, would finally speak. Cold cases often break because of conscience rather than evidence. People grow older. Relationships change. Secrets become heavier. George believed that whoever knew the truth would not remain silent forever. History has shown that such beliefs are sometimes justified. Many famous cold cases have been solved decades later through unexpected confessions, forgotten documents, or advances in forensic science. The Sodder case simply never received that moment. Instead, it remained suspended between history and mystery, between tragedy and possibility, between evidence and absence. Long after investigators packed away their files and reporters published their final articles, one extraordinary fact continued separating the Sodder disappearance from nearly every other unsolved case in America. It did not ask who committed the crime. It first demanded that investigators answer a far more fundamental question. Was there ever a crime scene in the way everyone believed? Or had the real crime taken place somewhere else entirely, hidden behind the flames that consumed a family home while the truth quietly slipped into the darkness beyond the firelight? The longer the Sodder mystery endured, the more it became a mirror. Every investigator who examined it saw something different. Fire experts focused on the blaze. Criminologists examined the possibility of abduction. Historians looked at the social tensions of post-war America. Psychologists studied the effects of prolonged uncertainty on an entire family. None of them reached exactly the same conclusion. Yet nearly all agreed on one point. The case had never been simple. By the late 1970s, George Sodder had spent more than 30 years pursuing answers. 30 years of interviews. 30 years of newspaper articles. 30 years of anonymous letters. 30 years of hope repeatedly colliding with disappointment. Few parents in American history had devoted so much of their lives to searching for children officially declared dead. His determination had become inseparable from the mystery itself. People who met George often expected bitterness. Instead, many described a man driven by quiet conviction. He spoke carefully. He avoided dramatic claims. He acknowledged when something was only a theory. But whenever someone insisted the case had already been solved, he returned to the same unanswered facts. The missing remains. The witness reports. The unexplained events before the fire. He believed unanswered questions deserved investigation, not dismissal. As researchers revisited original newspaper archives, another pattern emerged. Media coverage from the immediate aftermath reflected the investigative standards of the time. Early reports largely accepted official statements. As years passed, however, journalists became increasingly skeptical. New articles focused less on the fire itself and more on its contradictions. The case gradually shifted from being remembered as a tragic accident to being remembered as one of America's most enduring cold cases. Public perception had changed. Evidence had not. That distinction mattered. History is full of cases where public opinion moves in one direction while facts remain uncertain. The Sodder disappearance became exactly that kind of mystery, one supported by questions rather than conclusions. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science continued reshaping criminal investigations across the country. DNA profiling was still emerging. Fingerprint databases expanded. Dental identification became more sophisticated. Missing person investigations increasingly relied on centralized records and interstate cooperation. Had those resources existed in 1945, investigators might have tracked witness reports more efficiently. Anonymous tips could have been compared across jurisdictions. Potential sightings might have been documented systematically. Instead, much of the information arrived through scattered newspaper stories and handwritten correspondence. The opportunity for coordinated investigation had largely passed. Time had claimed another advantage. Researchers also examined the psychological impact of uncertainty. Families without confirmed answers often experience what experts now call ambiguous loss, a state in which loved ones are physically absent but psychologically present. Unlike confirmed death, ambiguous loss offers no clear ending. Grief remains suspended. Hope survives even when evidence weakens. For George and Jenny, that condition lasted the rest of their lives. Every holiday reopened possibilities. Every unexpected telephone call interrupted routine. Every unfamiliar face carried potential. The emotional burden never truly ended. Some investigators wonder whether the family's unwavering belief influenced public interpretation of the case. Certainly. Their persistence kept the mystery alive. Without George's relentless efforts, the Sodder disappearance might have faded into local history decades earlier. Instead, it remained part of the national conversation. His billboard, his interviews, his reward, his refusal to stop asking questions, all ensured that the 5 missing children were never completely forgotten. Yet, publicity carried its own consequences. False leads multiplied. Hoaxes increased. Anonymous callers occasionally invented elaborate stories. Some sought attention. Others appeared motivated by cruelty. Each new claim demanded time and emotional energy. Each disappointment deepened exhaustion. Still, George investigated them. Because ignoring the one genuine lead among dozens of false ones seemed unbearable. That is the cruel arithmetic of missing person investigations. One true clue can resemble every false one until proven otherwise. As historians reviewed community record from Fayetteville, they found a town forever linked to one extraordinary night. Older residents remembered seeing the glow of the fire against the winter sky. Some recalled hearing church bells later that Christmas morning. Others remembered the disbelief spreading from house to house. 5 children gone. No bodies found. Even those who accepted the official explanation often admitted the circumstances felt unusual. The mystery became part of local identity. Generations grew up hearing the story. Parents told children about the fire. Teachers mentioned it during local history lessons. Visitors asked directions to the site. The disappearance remained woven into the town's memory. Meanwhile, researchers attempted to reconstruct the physical layout of the original Sodder home using surviving photographs and descriptions. Could the children have escaped through another route? Could someone outside have reached them before the fire intensified? Could structural collapse have hidden evidence overlooked during the original search? Each reconstruction produced possibilities. None produced certainty. Fire dynamics are extraordinarily complex. Conditions change within seconds. Visibility disappears. Heat becomes overwhelming. Reconstructing those exact moments decades later proved nearly impossible. One persistent question involved a sequence of events. Exactly how much time elapsed between a mysterious object striking the roof and Jenny discovering the fire? Witness recollection suggested only a relatively short interval. If accurate, investigators asked whether that timing supported or weakened theories involving deliberate ignition. Again, definitive answers remained out of reach. The passage of decades had transformed evidence into interpretation. Another unresolved issue centered on communication. If someone had planned an abduction, coordination would have required multiple participants. Several witnesses later described seeing unfamiliar adults. Some mentioned vehicles. Others recalled unusual behavior. Yet no confirmed group was ever identified. No organization claimed involvement. No participant confessed. Large conspiracies typically become difficult to conceal over time. People argue. Relationships end. Secrets leak. The silence surrounding the Sodder case remained remarkable. Some researchers argue that this silence supported the accidental fire theory. Others counter that absence of confession proves nothing. History contains crime solved only after half a century or more. Silence alone cannot establish innocence or guilt. As the mystery matured, one realization became increasingly important. The Sodder disappearance was no longer simply about solving one case. It had become an example of why early investigations matter, why evidence preservation matters, why questioning assumptions matters, why certainty should never outrun proof. Law enforcement training gradually reflected those lessons. Modern investigators are taught to preserve scenes carefully, document extensively, and remain cautious about premature conclusions. Although the Sodder case alone did not create those standards, it illustrated the consequences when unanswered questions remain unresolved from the beginning. George understood that better than anyone. He had lived through every consequence. The years continued advancing. Friends grew older. Neighbors disappeared. Newspaper editors changed. The investigators who first examined the fire gradually left public service. Some passed away without ever knowing whether their conclusions had been correct. The mystery outlived them all. By now, if the missing children had survived, they would be approaching middle age. The possibility seemed increasingly distant, yet it never vanished entirely. Somewhere in America, George imagined, one of them might occasionally look into a mirror and wonder why childhood memories began with fragments rather than certainty. Perhaps a Christmas tree. Perhaps smoke. Perhaps a different surname given by unfamiliar adults. Perhaps nothing at all. Memory is fragile, especially in children, especially after trauma. The idea remained speculative, but speculation was all anyone possessed. As another anniversary approached, George visited the familiar places connected to the case. The property, the billboard, the photographs. Every location represented not only what had happened, but what had never been explained. The fire had lasted only hours. The investigation had lasted decades. And still, after all those years, one uncomfortable possibility lingered over every discussion. Perhaps the greatest obstacle to solving the Sodder mystery was not the absence of evidence. Perhaps it was that everyone had spent too long searching for answers inside the ashes, when the truth, if it still existed at all, might have left the burning house long before the first flames reached the roof.